In public speaking class this week, we were focusing on presenting data slides, and I introduced the concept of organizing your data presentation with two different models. One, you could lead with the big story and tell people right up front what's the main point of all this data, or you could finish with the big story, kind of build up to the climax in a sense. And I asked the students which one they preferred, and actually we talked about pluses and minuses of both sides. You might want to tell the main point of the data right at the beginning as an organizational tool, and then make smaller subpoints as you go on. Or maybe if you want the audience to remember the data the most, maybe you should say the most important thing at the very end, because people might remember the last thing that they heard of a story the most. And we could go on with these ideas. I don't think there's any one perfect way, but it will depend on your context and what you're trying to tell the audience and who the audience is. So let's look at a few examples we were doing in class, which were about vaccine manufacturer distribution of the COVID vaccines. Here's a chart of the number of COVID-19 vaccine doses given across the European Union by manufacturer, ever since the beginning of the vaccine approvals until earlier this week. Now, does something jump out at you? Is it really obvious what is the big point of this graph? If I'm starting with this data, I think I have to talk about Pfizer BioNTech first, because it's just so obvious. It takes up the majority of the space of the graph, and the audience is going to be looking there first, I believe. So if I didn't start with this, I think it might sound a little bit strange. So I might do something like this. It is clear that since the vaccines were first administered in the end of December, that Pfizer BioNTech has had the market share cornered. In fact, they had very little competition until the end of February, when AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine started to get taken up. But as we can see, Pfizer BioNTech had a very quick increase throughout the summer, to the point where now they account for nearly 3/4 of every vaccine administered across the European Union, which is a 6-fold advantage over their nearest competitor, Oxford AstraZeneca. So I think I would try to take care of that main point first. I would make sure I know the data that I'm talking about so I can be precise with my numbers. I already did the calculation on the calculator to know that Pfizer has 6 times more doses given than Oxford's AstraZeneca. So I don't want to make the audience do the math. I should tell that for them. I probably don't need to read the numbers specifically, because the audience can read that by themselves. I should do the job of the math for the audience. And then maybe I should go on and talk about some of the more details of the graph, if there's enough time or if it's appropriate, which might be something like, please be careful when looking at the order of the graph right here, because it might seem like Moderna is the second highest vaccine, but in fact, Oxford AstraZeneca has given more than Moderna. Moderna's third ranked, with Johnson & Johnson coming in a distant 4th. After the big 4, it's not actually Sputnik V which is next, but it is Sinovac at 9 million doses, the most significant after the major 4. Do I need to keep going? If I did, I might make comments specifically about Sputnik or Sinovac or something like that, but I think you get the idea. The only reason I could see to not talk about Pfizer first is perhaps if my audience was coming from a more Russian-dominated sphere, and they might think Sputnik V is the more common vaccine, or someone in a context of a Chinese vaccine being the dominant, then I might want to start with those and say something like, although it seems like Sinovac is being taken up the most by countries, this is clearly not the case in the European Union, where it is only the 5th most used manufacturer, accounting for less than 4... I didn't do the math yet. Oops. accounting for only about 4% of total doses given across the economic zone. It is Pfizer which is the dominant form, and so on. Okay, but let's assume that I'm giving this in the order of Pfizer being the dominant one, and then I can use that to lead into my next story. When we look at Japan, we see a similar trend, except even more exaggerated. Pfizer has been absolutely the most dominant vaccine in Japan, with no competition until early June, when Moderna was approved. But even so, as of August 4th, which is a little bit old data, but as of the most recently available data, Pfizer accounted for 93% of all vaccines across Japan. Now, that is fine. I can just, that would be the traditional approach, maybe just say what's really obvious there. There could be a more stylish way to do this data because it's just so simple and so obvious that Pfizer dominates. Actually, Hiroko in class had an interesting joke about Moderna, that we might be able to lead with Moderna as a little anecdote or story to make the style a little more interesting. So maybe we could do something like this. We could say, and this is in the context of speaking to our own class. So it's very audience specific because we all got the Moderna vaccine. So she said something like, well, when I was getting my vaccine in early August, with everybody around me receiving Moderna, at the time, I had thought it was a more major vaccine. But as we can see here, it is only used at 13% the rate of Pfizer, or something like that. Not even 13, I didn't do the calculation. But you see the problem of when you don't take care of your own data. That was my bad. If I was going to plan to lead with that, I should have done the calculation first. But you get the idea. Let's do one final slide to show you the way. Now, if I was going to just review here, I'm talking about Pfizer dominating the EU, even more domination of Japan. So now when I go to my next slide, even though Sinovac is by far the leader, perhaps it's more natural to start with Pfizer, since that has been my main talk so far. So maybe I would say something like, here in Chile and other South American countries in general, the Pfizer story looks to be more like its competitor Moderna in the EU and Japan. What I mean is, Pfizer was taken up more slowly and has always been the second most used vaccine in comparison to Sinovac, which has dominated COVID vaccine doses across Chile since they were introduced at the beginning of February. And at this point, as of November 1st, Sinovac has been used at threefold the rate of Pfizer-BioNTech, and it accounts for just under 3/4 of the country's total. So that's how I might do it if Pfizer was my main thing. Now again, if I, say, inverted this talk, if I started with Chile, I might invert my order. So if I was going to start with Chile, I think I have to start with Sinovac and talk about Pfizer as the lesser one. And then perhaps EU might be my next slide. And I could start with Sinovac, saying, in sharp contrast, Sinovac only accounts for, 4% of all of EU doses, where it's Pfizer that is the major source. Okay, so In conclusion, I've just tried to encourage you to think about different ways to organize your data. It doesn't need to go in the same order every time, and in fact, I think it really shouldn't, to keep your audience attention. Here, I'll just finish with this screen. If you want to pause it, you can, and look through 4 different models of spoken transition phrases, which are okay for spoken language. These are more casual than those that you see in writing a research article, and I think that's actually a good thing. If you always are saying thus and therefore and on the other hand, these are a little bit more formal, and they're okay in spoken language, but don't be afraid to say and, but, so. Just don't repeat them too often. So just color up your language a little bit with some variety of these ones.